suggest an actual date?
Yeah, and I hate to say it, but the Russians are, some of the Russian scientists that are involved in the astrophysics world that follow this particular model, even those who are believers in the electric universe model and don't go along with the idea of black holes at all, even they are saying that the midpoint of this squeeze should present itself sometime around the Hunab-Kut point in the Mayan calendar, which is, of course, December 21, 2012.
Yes, interesting.
And also, even more tellingly, even more coincidentally, so to speak, the width of the band in space relative to the size of our solar system is 20 years. So in other words, it takes our solar system 20 years to transit this thing, 10 years to reach the peak, and then 10 years to go away from it.
Yes.
And of course, much of the Mayan and the Mesoamerican and the Aztec and the Inca calendar systems are based on 13 by 20.
Right.
And it's like, probably no coincidence.
Indeed. Now, I know that we have a planet, everyone talks about the planet alignment that's going to happen on 2012, but we have a planet alignment every year. It's just the only difference is that the sun itself is going to be near its galactic center. That's correct, right?
Well, that's sort of true and not true. If you look at it from the viewpoint of, if we establish an artificial up and a down, so to speak, the alignment per se, the end of a 35,000-year cycle, that if we think of the Milky Way out there floating in space as a giant plate, sort of this flattened spiral that spins around, our solar system goes up and down through the ecliptic plane or the equator of that spiral because we're not really attached to it directly.
Yes.
We're probably part of Sagittarius B, a dwarf galaxy that's been eaten by the Milky Way, and we're gradually becoming assimilated over millions of years. And pretty soon might be 600 million years for all I know, but then we would settle in and no longer travel up and down over the ecliptic. Now, this is really a key point because it's that ecliptic band that is the magnetic band as well. And get this, that's also the part of the space where all the loose crud accumulates by, the extrasolar planets that just aren't attached to any sun and all these giant rocks and stuff that are just whizzing around. A lot of them eventually find themselves down in this particular point of the squeeze of the ecliptic, simply because that's where the magnetic pressures are the greatest.
Yes.
And they hang around. Yes. And so we transit through that.
Huh, interesting.
And so if you go back and you look at Velikovsky and a lot of these other individuals, and they're writing about catastrophic impact on the solar system and great changes, and many of them were of the opinion that it was a 35,000-year cycle and longer cycles associated with that cycle as we went up and down through this band of debris that caused us to run into a lot of this stuff.
Right. When we start looking at earthquake activity, for example, I found on the USGS site, I found two conflicting points of data from them. One page, when they were talking about historically, as far as earthquakes are concerned, they showed a gradual increase from like the 1900s or the 1800s, moving all the way up into present time. And once you get past 2003, the graph charts were off the scale. I mean, they just were skyrocketed. But yet in another section of their site showing the activity, and we're talking about deadly earthquakes, they actually showed their data on deadly earthquakes, large deadly earthquakes, were actually down. And after talking with Jim Berkland about this particular subject, he agrees. He says it's not on the rise. We've had an unusually quiet window frame here. But that's usually indicates to him the calm before the storm, because he sees all this different activity going on within our solar system, and with our most closest neighbor being the moon itself, and the tides the way they're rising, like we mentioned before, he says that we're gearing up to really see some activity. We should anyway.
I would agree. The issue for us, in part of our data, we ended up with so many predictions for destructive at some level, and I'm not saying catastrophic, but breaking windows, or shattering a grocery store shelf, that kind of thing.
Yes.
Destructive level of earthquakes should ratchet up over this summer. Now, there's a problem with our prediction, which we note at the time that we made it, was that there's so much data relating to earthquakes that there was no real particular mega nasty that we could pick out of all of the stuff that we saw coming.
Right.
Okay, lots and lots and lots of activity is also associated with the volcanoes, which are going crazy everywhere.
Right.
I mean, we've got volcanic activity in the south, and even But actually, to a certain extent, there's been this quiescent period, even with the Alaska problems. We're not seeing as much coming out of the Russian or that part of the Ring of Fire as we should.
Yes.
So it may be that what's actually happening is that the big squeeze is transferring a lot of the pressure, if you will, to those weaker points, the further stretch, so to speak, that's in the Ring of Fire, where we have less bordering continents. So in other words, if you think of the map of the Earth, you have the arms of Alaska reaching towards the arms of Siberia at the top part of the Pacific Ocean.
Yes.
And it may be actually working to the benefit of those of us in the Northern Hemisphere, in the sense that may be pushing the magnetic forces that are affecting the Ring of Fire into erupting further south. And that's why we're seeing all of the references in our data anyway to new lands in the South Pacific.
Yes.
Now, at some point, it's going to shade over, at least in our data, into new lands erupting somewhere south in the Indian Ocean. And that was described as, we've had that in the since like 2002 with a suggestion that it might hit within the next 10 years. The issue for us is that the longer we see it in the data, the more impact it makes on the human emotional state planet-wide.
Right. I would imagine that collecting data on earthquakes would be incredibly difficult, because even whenever you look at the earthquake maps, when we start covering earthquake predictions, for example, earthquakes are happening all the time. Ones, twos, threes, and they're everywhere. People feel them, and so the data is just would be.
Well, and also we have that further problem in the sense that we don't actually even, or it's not a problem for us because it's sort of an opportunity, really. We don't look for earthquake data at all.
Right.
What we see is the linguistics about something that show up after it.
Right.
So we were very good about the Chinese quake because we had lots of very clear linguistics and archetypes that are easy to interpret. It's awful hard to misinterpret the words around a wedding or interruption, right?
Right.
And you associate wedding interruption with an earthquake, and you know that Chinese quake, and then 2 weeks later, all the pictures of the ruined chapels and all the brides and grooms crawling out and so forth. It was just an instant match to what we'd said because the archetypes were so clear. Now, of course, if you had that same level of resolution, which we believe we have, but you're just seeing repetitious words about earthquakes here and there, small damage over and over and over again, it becomes almost impossible to separate it out. Not because of necessarily the plethora of earthquakes everywhere, but because apparently people will really be talking about them. And that is actually part of our problem with the global coastal event, is that as we get towards some kind of a crescendo, we don't know if it's a crescendo of language where we as a planet just decide, we're disgusted with that subject, tell all the news people, don't talk about it for 6 months. We're just tired of it,
Right.
Or whether there's some kind of crescendo that actually is some measurable event. And again, we look and see the other side of it, and we see that there are small measurable events occurring all the time at the moment, and they do appear to be aggregating into something larger.
Yes. The hurricane season, they've actually categorized it as going to be relatively calm this year. That's what they're expecting or forecasting anyway, which is incredible to me. As far as the calmness in things always make me nervous. It really does. When the sun had all this major activity a couple years ago, and was really kicking up, and then all of a sudden just went silent. It concerned me. And the same thing with the hurricanes and the earthquakes and everything else. It seems like we're in the center, getting ready to get hit again.
Well, there's another. We can look at it this way as well, relative to the magnetic squeeze stuff. It's a known, observable laboratory phenomena that if you hold water or hold atmosphere in a magnetic containment vessel, it'll hold many more times the level of moisture.
And we're going to get back to it here. Cliff, welcome back.
I'm still here.
Wow. I'm sitting here and I'm looking at an email that says, "Hey, Jack, could you ask your guest if there is any evidence whatsoever that the October 14th UFO sighting over Alabama is going to come to pass?"
No, we find, see, here's the thing. We don't count words, but we're aware of the conscious memes that are floating around there, the thought viruses that are out and about on the internet.
Yes.
Because they come up we do have a process of discarding most of the words we actually pick up, because any conscious expression of this kind of stuff, we don't really
want to get. We're after the subconscious or the collective archetype. But the stuff we have around it suggests that it will not, simply because the nature of the source. And see, there's the problem. You get back to that instance of the 40 frames per second in a 22 trillion frame per second universe.
Yes.
And if you perceive beyond the 40 frames, well, let's go right back to your example here with the truck.
Yes.
Basically, what occurred to you was that for that brief period of time, you were perceiving beyond your usual limitation of 40 frames per second, and you got a glimpse of what was going to happen in the future, and it manifested in front of you substantially enough in order to be able to prove itself to you that this was an actual prescient occurrence. Whether you think you created it or not is outside of the bounds of the exposure of reality.
Yes.
There's the problem, though. That instantly came up in your mind. So say that someone perceives the giant UFO showing up, and they have an adequate or an actual perception of that is as real as your perception of that truck. Only they cannot effectively, within time, know where that setting is going to be. So the mind instantly starts intruding and throwing things around. It wants to assist. It's a nasty little critter, a terrible, terrible master, but a semi-decent slave if you get it under control. But a lot of people that are perceiving beyond 40 frames per second are having trouble getting their mind under control. And so, boom, there you go, a date's attached. Prophecy is made. People get whipped up, and nothing happens.
Yes. If you got one, if we're thinking about the 40 frames per second, if two people are focused on the same thing, wouldn't that increase it to 80 frames per second? And thus,
no, it doesn't work that way.
No,
it's like being in a movie theater.
Okay.
If everybody in the movie theater is perceiving the same thing, it's still being shown at 40 frames per second. There's limitations on the hardware. Bear in mind that your wetware, if we will, the actual brain, eyes, and all of this kind of thing in spinal and so on, is all composed of the same non-material substance that you're attempting to perceive. So it gets into this very tricky thing that leads you quickly into the very depths of Zen and Buddhism and all these kind of meditation traditions and the actual technologies involved.
Right.
And it's very difficult to go beyond that 40 frames per second. Now, what it does do is this. The two people or more people focusing on the same subject may not increase the frames per second rate of anybody's perception, but they may solidify the amount of energy that goes into the manifestation there. So, in other words, it's kind of a weird way of looking, a very complex way of looking at the old question of if a tree falls in the woods and no one's around, is there a sound?
Yes.
Okay, now imagine it at a much higher level where we're saying if the powers that be threw a false flag operation and blew a big hole in the desert in Utah and none of us knew about it, would we care?
Good point.
But if all of a sudden we're all focused on it, maybe then it starts taking on more of a perceptual reality because it's intruding on our emotions, which kind of like amplify each other and so on.
True.
And so it's a matter of manipulation of emotions from their viewpoint. That is to say, the powers that be.
Yes. Well, I know that if an accident happens on a street corner and let's say 10 people see it, as you go around, you interview each person. Everyone has, from a different vantage point, a little bit of different perception of what exactly happened. We even see this in courtrooms sometimes when people go up on the witness stands. They sit there and they'll swear up and down they saw one thing when something else completely different happened. I don't know if emotion gets into it or what have you.
That's actually that's our mental filters.
Yes.
And that's the issue that they ran into I read a bunch of these really interesting studies of the armies dinking around with remote viewing. And one of the things they determined was that the mental noise has to be able to be eliminated. And curiously, I don't know why they said curiously, the people that were really good at doing the remote viewing were meditation trained vegetarians because they didn't have any disturbance from their diet. And so they